The plains were silent until a soaked little girl whispered, "She's dying." Jedediah Stone lifted his rifle and decided the law would be him tonight. The wind across the high plains was a razor, honing its edge on the corners of the lone cabin. It carried the scent of dust and distance, 1,000 miles of nothing pressing in on the solitary circle of lamplight where Jedediah Stone sat. He was a man built to the scale of the mountains. His hands, currently field stripping a Winchester with practiced economy, looked more suited to splitting timber than delicate work. The slide and click of metal was the only sound against the rising howl of the wind, a lonely rhythm in a life defined by silence. He had chosen this quiet, earned it in a past he never spoke of, a past etched in the white line of a scar across his knuckles. The land was an honest opponent. It might kill you with thirst or a blizzard, but it never lied. Men, he had learned, were a different, more treacherous terrain. A frantic pounding on the door shattered his solitude. It wasn't the knock of a lost traveler. It was the desperate, ragged drumming of a fist on the last door in the world. Jedediah didn't startle. His movements simply ceased, his head lifting slowly. The rifle was reassembled, resting on the table. He rose, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows of the cabin, and unbolted the door. The wind tore it from his grasp, throwing a sheet of cold rain into the room. Framed in the maelstrom was a child, no older than 8, soaked through, turned trembling with a terror that hollowed out her eyes. Her dress was torn, her face a mess of mud and tears. She looked up at the giant of a man blocking her path, her breath catching in ragged sobs. "They hurt my mama," she gasped, the words nearly stolen by the wind. She's dying." The child, Elara, crumpled, her strength gone. Jedediah caught her with an ease that belied his size, scooping her up as if she weighed nothing. He kicked the door shut against the storm and carried her to his cot, pulling a thick wool blanket over her shivering form. His hands, which could reassemble a rifle in the dark, were surprisingly gentle. He stoked the fire, the flames leaping up to cast a warm, dancing light over the Spartan room, then moved to the stove to heat a tin of broth. The girl's eyes followed his every move, wide with fear and a dawning, desperate hope. He knelt by the cot, holding the warm mug for her. She drank, her small hands clutching his large fingers that held the cup steady. "Who?" Jedediah's voice was a low rumble, the sound of rocks grinding together deep in the earth. "Where is she?" "Kane's men," she whispered, the name a curse. "Silas Kane. They broke our wagon. Took the box." She pointed a trembling finger east, toward the broken lands where canyons cut the earth like wounds. "She's in the wash, under the black overhang. Told me to run. Told me to find help." Jedediah stood, his decision already made. The storm was a wall of black, a suicidal ride for any sane man. But the girl's words had unlocked something inside him, a debt he thought long buried. He pulled on a heavy oilskin coat and checked the loads in his Colt. He packed a small satchel, bandages, carbolic acid, a flask of whiskey. Every action was precise, stripped of hesitation. He was no longer a rancher weathering a storm. He was a pathfinder with a mission. He looked at the child, who watched him with a fierce intensity. "Bar the door after me," he commanded, his voice softer now. "Stay by the fire. I will bring her back." The ride was a battle against the elements. Jedediah's roan, sure-footed and powerful, moved through the storm-lashed terrain, a partnership of trust against the chaos of the wind and rain. He followed the landmarks the girl had given him, a lightning-splintered cottonwood, a ridge shaped like a sleeping wolf, his own tracking skills filling in the gaps, reading the faint story of the girl's flight almost erased by the downpour. He found the wash as the storm grumbled its way east, leading behind a bruised, weeping sky. The scene was one of brutal violation. A wagon lay on its side, a wheel shattered, its canvas cover flapping like a broken wing. The ground was a churned mess of hoofprints and boot tracks. He dismounted, his rifle in hand, his eyes missing nothing. The glint of a spent .44 Henry rimfire cartridge, the dark stain on the ground near a splintered strongbox that had been pried open and emptied. Under the black rock overhang, sheltered from the worst of the rain, a woman lay still. Anya. Her face was waxen, her breathing a shallow flutter. A makeshift bandage on her thigh was soaked through with blood. Her eyes, the same fierce, intelligent eyes as her daughter's, opened as he knelt beside her. "Elara?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "She's safe," Jedediah said. "At my cabin?" He wasted no more words. He opened his medical satchel, his large hands moving with a surgeon's precision. He cut away the ruined dress. The wound was a clean shot through the thigh, the bone shattered. It was not a warning shot. It was a crippling, a sentence to die slowly in the wilderness. He poured whiskey over the wound, and she hissed, her hands clenching into fists in the dirt. "Kane," she gritted out, a spark of anger cutting through the pain. "He wanted my husband's ledgers. Proof, deeds, affidavits. Everything to show how he's been stealing this territory blind." She looked at him, her gaze sharp, appraising. "Elara said she would find an honest man. Did she?" Jedediah didn't answer directly. He was focused on his work, using 2 splintered pieces of the wagon as a splint. His competence was the only answer she needed. He knew she couldn't be moved far. The 2-day ride to the nearest town would be a death sentence. The ticking clock had started. They rode north, she murmured, her strength failing, toward Purgatory's maw, the old mining camp. "That's his den." He finished binding the splint and gave her a sip of water. He made her as comfortable as possible, building a small, smokeless fire to ward off the chill. It was a risk, but leaving her to freeze was a greater one. "Rest," he told her, standing to survey the trail leading out of the wash. The rain had made a mess of the tracks, but not for him. He could see the deep impressions of 4 horses, riding heavy and fast. Arrogant, they weren't even trying to hide their trail. Before he mounted his roan, he turned back to her. "My name is Jedediah Stone." It was an offering, a promise. Anya met his gaze. "Get it back, Mr. Stone," she whispered. "Not for me. For every family he's ruined. For Elara's future." Jedediah looked north, toward the jagged peaks that hid Purgatory's maw. He was no longer just a man seeking justice for a stranger. He was a force of nature, and a storm of his own making was about to break over Silas Kane. The trail was a faint language on the land, a story of displaced stones and bruised sagebrush that only Jedediah could read. He moved with a steady, ground-eating pace, his eyes not on the tracks themselves, but on the terrain ahead, anticipating the path of least resistance, the likely spots for water or ambush. The men he hunted were trespassers here. He was part of the land itself. By midday, he found their first camp in a shallow box canyon. The embers were still warm, careless. They'd left empty tins and a discarded whiskey bottle. 2 men had been left as a rear guard, while the other 2 pushed on with the prize. Jedediah saw them before they saw him. They were lounging by the fire, passing a flask, one oiling his pistol, the other sharpening a knife. They felt secure in the vast emptiness, insulated by their arrogance. That was their mistake. He dismounted a 1/4 mile back, leaving his roan in a thicket of juniper. He moved on foot, silent as a shadow, the wind in his favor. He watched them for 10 minutes, studying their rhythms, their blind spots, the nervous tick of the knife sharpener. He circled around, climbing a scree slope to get above them, his boots sliding on the loose rock, but his balance perfect. From his perch, he had a clear field of fire. He waited. The moment came when the nervous one stood up to relieve himself, his back turned. The other was still hunched over his pistol. Jedediah raised his Winchester. He wasn't aiming for a man. He fired a single shot, the crack echoing through the canyon as the bullet sparked off the rock face just above their heads. A shower of stone chips rained down on them. As they flinched, looking up in confusion, Jedediah was already moving, sliding down the scree slope in a controlled avalanche of dust and rock. He landed in the camp as they were turning back, a terrifying apparition of dust and violence. The pistol man scrambled for his weapon, but Jedediah was faster. The rifle butt swung in a swift, brutal arc, catching the man on the temple. He dropped without a sound. The nervous one had his knife out, but he was frozen for a critical second by the sheer shock of the attack. Jedediah closed the distance, his left hand trapping the man's knife wrist, twisting with the man's own momentum, until the blade clattered to the ground. A single precise blow to the jaw, and the second man went down. The entire engagement took less than 20 seconds. Jedediah bound them with their own belts. He searched their pockets, his movements efficient. He found a folded piece of paper, a crude map marking a rendezvous point. Purgatory's maw. It confirmed Anya's story and gave him a timeline. 2 days. The ticking clock grew louder. He also found a small, carved wooden bird, recognizing it as the mate to one he had seen in Elara's pocket. It must have fallen from the stolen box. He pocketed the small token. When the nervous one came to, sputtering and terrified, Jedediah didn't need to use threats. His silent, imposing presence was enough. The man spilled everything: the plan, the camp's location, the number of men. They were to meet Kane's main force, then ride into the town of redemption in a week with the forged deeds to claim their stolen land. Jedediah left them tied. A posse or a prospector would find them eventually. He had no time for frontier justice. He took their water and ammunition, the only currency that mattered out here, and rode away without a backward glance. The first test was passed, but it was only the beginning. He was no longer just a pursuer. Now they knew he was coming. The trail led north into the alkali flats, a shimmering white hell that baked under the relentless sun. The heat was a physical enemy, warping the air, stealing a man's strength. Jedediah rode steadily, his face wrapped in a bandana, rationing his water, ignoring the burn in his throat. He couldn't afford to arrive at Kane's stronghold weak. He needed an edge. He veered from the direct path, his destination a place not on any map, a squalid collection of driftwood and desperation known as the Last Drop. It was run by a man named Sal, a demolitions man by trade, a cynic by experience. They had worked a job together years ago in the Northern Territories, one that had gone sideways in a hail of gunfire and collapsing rock. They weren't friends, but they shared a mutual, hard-earned respect. Sal knew how to make things fall down, and Jedediah figured he might need that particular talent. The Last Drop was as he remembered it, a leaning wreck of a building with a creaking sign. He pushed through the swinging doors into air, thick with the smell of stale beer and desperation. A few hard-faced men watched him from the shadows, their eyes lingering on the Colt at his hip. Behind the bar, a wiry man with a shock of gray hair and a long scar down his arm was polishing a glass. Sal looked up, a flicker of recognition in his cynical eyes. "Stone," he said, his voice a rasp. "Thought a mountain fell on you up in the Bitterroots." "It missed," Jedediah replied, taking a seat at the bar. "I need a drink." And a conversation. Sal slid a glass of whiskey toward him. "Whiskey's for sale. Conversations cost more." "I'm going after Silas Kane," Jedediah said, cutting straight to the point. Sal stopped polishing the glass. The saloon grew quiet. "That's not a conversation, Stone. That's a eulogy. Kane owns this territory. He's got 30 guns in a rock fortress at Purgatory's maw. He shot a woman and left her to die," Jedediah said. He laid out the essential facts: the child, the broken wagon, the stolen box of ledgers. When he was done, he pushed a heavy leather pouch across the bar. Sal didn't touch it. This isn't just a job for you. You've got that look again. The one you get right before you do something spectacularly stupid, and probably fatal. I'm finishing a debt, Jedediah said. Sal stared at him for a long moment, then looked down at the pouch of gold. Kane's been squeezing me for months. Protection. Thinks he owns me too. He finally grunted, a sound that was almost a laugh, and swept the pouch under the bar. All right, you crazy bastard. You've got yourself a demolitions man. But we do this smart. His camp is a natural fortress. One way in, one way out. Cliffs on all sides. The men I questioned had a map, Jedediah said. Showed a secondary entrance. A ventilation shaft. Sal's eyes narrowed. Sounds too easy. Kane's not a fool. They spent the next hour in the back room, a storeroom filled with coils of fuse, blasting powder, and crates of dynamite. Sal was in his element, his hands moving with a familiar reverence over the tools of his trade. We'll need to scout the place first. See what we're really walking into. As they prepared, a sharp-eyed woman named Maria, who ran the trading post side of the establishment, watched them with a knowing silence. Jedediah thought of Anya and Elara. Sal, he began. The woman and the girl ... Sal seemed to understand. Maria can get a message to a friend, old prospector named Gus. He's reliable. He can bring them here. They'll be safe. Safer than anywhere else in this territory. The alliance was forged, not on friendship, but on a shared enemy and a history of surviving the impossible. As dusk fell, they rode out, two ghosts heading into the Badlands. The plan was a dangerous piece of improvisation, but for the first time, Jedediah was not alone on the trail. The approach to Purgatory's maw was a slow, deliberate crawl through a labyrinth of canyons and razorback ridges. They moved by the light of a sliver moon, their horses' hooves wrapped in cloth. From a high vantage point, they scouted the mining camp. It was a fortress, just as Sal had described. The main camp was built on a wide ledge, accessible only by a single, winding road guarded by a fortified gate and sentries perched on the rocks above. A frontal assault was suicide. Powder magazine and assay office, Sal whispered, pointing to two squat buildings near the main mine entrance. That's where he'll be keeping your box, right in the heart of the beast. They spent the first night watching, memorizing guard patterns, mapping the flow of men. The map Jedediah had taken from the guards showed the ventilation shaft on the far side of the mountain, marked as a weakness. It felt too good to be true. A gift horse, Jedediah murmured, studying the location through his spyglass. Let's check its teeth. They left the horses and climbed for 2 hours over treacherous broken rock. The shaft was there, exactly as marked, covered by a heavy iron grate with a rusted, flimsy lock. It was an invitation. It's a trap, Sal said, his voice flat. He ran a hand over the rock around the opening. Fresh drill holes, see 'em? The rock's been weakened. They're not trying to keep us out. They're trying to lure us in. We go down that shaft, and they bring the whole mountain down on our heads. It was a chilling revelation. Kane wasn't just a warlord. He was a strategist. He knew someone would come for the box, and he had laid a trap for them. This was the midpoint, the reversal. They had lost their one potential advantage. Disappointment was a luxury they couldn't afford. They retreated to their hiding spot, the new reality settling over them like a shroud. The entire camp would be on high alert. Their resources were dwindling. They had enough food and water for a few more days, but time, their most precious commodity, was running out. Anya's life depended on their speed. As they sat in the cold darkness, Sal was seized by a racking cough, a dry, painful sound that echoed in the quiet. The hard climb had taken its toll. There might be another way, he rasped, pulling out a worn, creased map of his own, a survey from his prospecting days. The old works, the original shafts from the first silver strike. They say they're flooded, unstable, haunted. He tapped a spot on the map, a thin line that ran directly beneath the main ledge where the assay office stood. They called this one the Widow's Gamble, abandoned because of an underground spring. If the legends are right, and if that tunnel hasn't collapsed completely, it would bring us up right under their feet. It was a desperate, insane plan, a choice between a known trap and an unknown hell. "We go at midnight tomorrow," Jedediah said, his voice resolute. Their options had narrowed to a single, deadly path. Just then, a low rumble echoed from the far side of the mountain. A plume of dust rose into the air, stark against the stars. Kane had grown impatient. He'd triggered his trap anyway, collapsing the ventilation shaft. It was a message. A display of power. He was closing the net. The reversal was complete. They were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. The hours before the assault were a tense, silent ritual. Huddled in a shallow cave, Jedediah and Sal made their final preparations. Sal, though weakened by his cough, laid out his tools with a craftsman's reverence. Coils of fuse, grease-paper-wrapped sticks of dynamite, a small box of gleaming copper blasting caps. "Used to build things with this stuff," Sal muttered, taping 3 sticks of dynamite together into a single charge. "Tunnels for the railroad. Now, I guess I'm in the unbuilding trade." Jedediah said nothing. He field-stripped and cleaned his weapons for the 3rd time, a methodical action, a balm to his frayed nerves. He felt the weight of his promise to Anya and Elara, the weight of bringing Sal into this meat grinder. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Navigate the flooded, collapsed tunnels of the Widow's Gamble, plant a charge directly beneath the assay office, and use the blast and the ensuing chaos as their only door. 1,000 things could go wrong. As darkness fell, they made their move. The entrance to the Widow's Gamble was a jagged scar on a lower canyon wall, almost completely hidden by a rockfall. The air that seeped from it was cold and smelled of wet stone and decay. "No turning back now, Stone," Sal said, lighting a shielded lantern. The flame threw their shadows, long and distorted, against the rock. They squeezed through the narrow opening and into the abyss. The tunnel plunged downward, the floor slick with moisture. The silence was absolute, broken only by the steady drip of water echoing in the deep dark. This was a new kind of enemy, a terrain that could kill them with a single tremor. They waded through sections of chest-deep, ice-cold water. They passed side tunnels choked with the rubble of ancient collapses. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a chasm spanned by a single rotting wooden bridge. "Map says this is the only way," Sal rasped, his cough echoing in the confined space. Jedediah went first, his boots testing each plank, the old wood groaning in protest. Halfway across, a board splintered. He shifted his weight just in time, his heart hammering. He made it to the other side and signaled for Sal. Sal was lighter, but a violent coughing fit seized him mid-span. His foot slipped. For a sickening moment, he dangled over the blackness, his fingers scrabbling for a hold. Jedediah lunged, his arm shooting out, grabbing Sal's jacket and hauling him to safety. They lay on the stone floor, their breathing ragged. "Guess we're even for that business in the Bitterroots," Sal wheezed, a grim smile on his face. They pushed on, the near disaster lending a new urgency to their movements. Finally, Sal stopped, his hand on the tunnel ceiling. "This is it," he whispered. "The assay office is right above us." 30 feet of rock and timber. The risky plan had worked. They were in the heart of Kane's fortress, a venomous secret coiled right beneath his feet. Sal pulled out a hand-cranked auger and began the grueling, painstaking work of drilling a hole for the charge. Jedediah stood guard, pistol in hand, his senses straining, a coiled spring in the suffocating darkness. Now came the most dangerous part of all. The ticking clock was no longer measured in days, but in the length of a single fuse. The gauntlet was behind them. The precipice lay directly ahead. Sal worked with a desperate, focused energy, drilling the hole for the charge. The grating sound of the auger against rock was terrifyingly loud in the subterranean silence. Jedediah stood watch, his body angled back down the tunnel, his pistol ready, every nerve screaming. Above them, they could hear the muffled sounds of the camp, the clump of boots, a distant laugh, the clink of a bottle. Kane's men were celebrating their victory, oblivious to the death being prepared just beneath their feet. Sal packed the hole with a carefully measured amount of dynamite. Too little, and the blast wouldn't break through. Too much, and it would bring the building down, burying them alive. He attached a blasting cap and a short 3-minute fuse. He looked at Jedediah, his eyes gleaming in the lantern light. "Once this is lit, there's no going back," he rasped. "The smoke and noise will be our only cover. In, grab the box, and out. Don't stop for anything." Jedediah gave a single, sharp nod, pulling his bandana up over his nose. Sal struck a match, the sudden flare brilliant in the dark. He touched it to the fuse. It sparked, a small fizzing serpent of fire, eating its way toward the charge. 3 minutes, Sal said. They retreated behind a rock pillar. The wait was an eternity. Jedediah's world narrowed to the sound of his own breathing and the frantic beat of his heart. The fuse burned down. The explosion was not a loud crack, but a deep, gut-thumping WHUMP that shook the very rock around them. Dust and debris rained down. Through the haze, where the charge had been, a ragged hole now gaped in the ceiling, opening into the world above. Before the dust settled, Jedediah was moving. "Go," he yelled, scrambling up the pile of rubble and pulling himself through the splintered opening. He emerged into chaos. The assay office was a wreck of shattered timber and upturned furniture. Through the windows, men were shouting, running toward the source of the blast. The surprise was total. Sal came up behind him, a satchel in one hand, a pistol in the other. On a heavy oak desk sat a steel-banded strongbox. There. Jedediah moved to the desk while Sal stood watch. The box was locked. Jedediah didn't waste time looking for a key. He drew his Colt, aimed at the lock, and fired. The shot was deafening. The lock, mangled, sprang open. He threw back the lid. Inside were the ledgers, the deeds, the affidavits. He swept them into Sal's satchel. "Got it!" Sal yelled, just as the office door was kicked open. One of Kane's men stood there, his face a mask of shock. Sal fired without hesitation. The man crumpled, but the shot had given them away. "They're in the assay office," a voice shouted from outside. "Back to the hole," Jedediah commanded. They scrambled for their escape route, bullets splintering the doorframe behind them. They were halfway there when a voice, cold and commanding, cut through the noise. "Stone!" Jedediah froze. Standing in the swirling dust was Silas Kane, flanked by 2 of his men. A dueling pistol was in his hand, aimed not at Jedediah, but at Sal. "You came a long way for a box of paper," Kane said, his voice calm. "Leave it. You can walk away. The woman you shot is still alive," Jedediah countered, his own pistol steady on Kane's chest. "She sent me." Kane smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "A loose end. I'll correct that." It was a decisive moment. He could shoot Kane, but the other 2 would cut Sal down. He saw Sal's hand move toward the last stick of dynamite in his belt. Jedediah gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. Not yet. He needed a better diversion. He chose the one Kane wouldn't expect. He threw the satchel, not at Kane, but into the far corner of the room. As every eye instinctively followed the motion, Jedediah lunged, not at Kane, but at the floor. He stomped down with all his weight on a large splintered floorboard next to the hole. The weakened wood gave way, sending a shower of debris into the tunnel below, a perfect, chaotic diversion. The moment the floorboard splintered, The room erupted. Kane's men, distracted by the thrown satchel, spun back as Jedediah launched himself toward them. He moved with the speed of a charging bear, closing the distance in 2 strides. He wasn't shooting. He was disrupting. He slammed into the 2 men flanking Kane, his sheer mass sending them stumbling, their shots going wide. In that second of chaos, Sal seized the opening. He lunged for the satchel, scooping it up. Kane, recovering with chilling speed, leveled his pistol not at the giant grappling with his men, but at Sal, who now held the prize. "Drop it," Kane barked. From the floor, Jedediah saw the deadly geometry of the standoff. Kane had the clean shot. There was only one way to change the math. "Sal now," he roared. Sal understood. He didn't drop the satchel. He dropped the last stick of dynamite. He'd already lit the short, 10-second fuse in the confusion. It fell to the floor, sputtering. Panic shattered Kane's control. His men scrambled backward, survival instincts overriding loyalty. Kane himself was forced to dive for cover behind the heavy desk. The explosion was a concussive wave of force and shrapnel, blowing the office door off its hinges. It was the ultimate smokescreen. Jedediah and Sal were already diving back through the original hole in the floor as the dynamite went off. They landed hard in the tunnel below, the shockwave washing over them. Above, the camp was in an uproar. "This way," Sal yelled. They ran, stumbling through the oppressive darkness of the mine, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. It was a race against time, a desperate marathon through the guts of the earth. They reached the chasm with the rotten bridge. There was no time to cross carefully. "Go," Jedediah urged. Sal sprinted across. Jedediah followed, his heavier weight making the structure groan and sway. A shout from behind. One of Kane's men, a rifle at his shoulder. A shot rang out, the bullet smacking into the rock wall inches from Jedediah's head. Jedediah threw himself the last few feet, landing on the far side as the bridge finally gave way, its timbers plunging into the darkness. They had cut off the most direct pursuit. They kept moving, their lungs burning. Finally, a glimmer of moonlight ahead, the entrance. They burst out into the cool night air, gasping, bruised and battered. They had the box. But the war was not over. The baying of hounds echoed from the main camp. Kane was sending trackers. They scrambled to their hidden horses. As they mounted, Jedediah looked back at the lights of Purgatory's maw, an angry swarm of fireflies on the mountainside. They had struck the heart of the beast, and now it was wounded and enraged. The escape had just begun. The flight from Purgatory's maw was a desperate 2-day chase through the Badlands. Jedediah led them on a tortuous weaving path, using every trick he knew to confuse the hounds and throw off their pursuers. Sal, grim-faced and silent, rode beside him, the satchel tied securely to his saddle. The ordeal had taken its toll. His cough was a constant, painful rasp, but his resolve was iron. They were brothers now, forged in the darkness and fire beneath the earth. On the second day, they crested a ridge and saw the leaning shape of the last drop. Sanctuary. Maria was waiting, a rifle resting in the crook of her arm. 4 of Kane's men passed through yesterday, she said, her voice low and urgent. Asking questions. I sent them west. I don't think they believed me. Kane was trying to cut them off. They brought the horses into the hidden corral and entered the back room. Sal slumped into a chair, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Jedediah placed the satchel on the table. He emptied its contents. It was all there, the ledgers detailing Kane's extortion, the forged deeds, the signed affidavits from men who had disappeared. It was the entire story of Kane's brutal reign, written in ink and blood. "My God," Maria whispered, looking at a deed for a ranch whose family had been found dead after a supposed cattle raid. Anya hadn't been exaggerating. This box could liberate the entire region. What now? Sal rasped. "We take this to the marshal in redemption?" "You can't," Maria said. "The marshal is in Kane's pocket. You'd be in a cell, and that box would be at the bottom of a well before sunset." They had the weapon, but they were surrounded. Wounds were tended. Sal's cough was worse. Maria cleaned and stitched a long gash on Jedediah's arm from a ricochet. The cost of their victory was written on their bodies. Maria told them that Anya and Elara were safe. Her friend Gus had brought them to a hidden cabin in the hills. Anya was weak, but holding on. The news settled a great weight in Jedediah's chest. He had kept the first part of his promise. Now he had to finish it. He looked at the papers. They couldn't go to the law, so they would have to bring the law to them. "There's a circuit judge," Jedediah said, his voice firm. "Judge Alistair Blackwood. An honest one. He's due in Silver Creek in 3 days." Silver Creek was 50 miles east. Kane's men were looking for them on the western trails. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. "We ride at dawn," Jedediah declared. The truth was revealed. The debts were tallied. Now came the final desperate race to see justice done. The journey to Silver Creek was a tense crawl across a hostile landscape. They traveled as 3 separate points of a moving triangle for security. Jedediah rode point, a quarter-mile ahead, reading the terrain. Sal, weakened but resolute, rode with the satchel. Maria, a rifle across her lap, rode drag, her sharp eyes watching their back trail. They rested during the heat of the day and rode through the cooler nights, their communication reduced to hand signals. On the evening of the second day, Maria signaled a halt. "Riders," she said, her voice tight. 3 of them, closing fast. Jedediah saw the dust cloud. Kane's men had found their trail. "We can't outrun them all the way," Sal stated, his breathing strained. "We make a stand," Jedediah said, his gaze sweeping over the terrain. They were in a region of broken rock and narrow canyons. "Maria, you take the satchel. Ride for Silver Creek. Don't stop. Find Judge Blackwood. Give him the papers." "No," Maria said fiercely. "We fight together. This isn't a vote." Jedediah's voice left no room for argument. "Your part is the most important. If that satchel doesn't make it, none of this matters. Go." Maria hesitated, then saw the absolute certainty in his eyes. She nodded grimly. "Godspeed, Jedediah." She spurred her horse and disappeared into the dusk. Jedediah and Sal rode to a narrow pass ahead, a natural bottleneck. They took up positions in the rocks on opposite sides of the trail, their rifles ready. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had the terrain. "Just like the old days, eh, Stone?" Sal said, a dry, humorless chuckle escaping him. An hour later, Kane's men arrived, slowing as they sensed the trap. The silence stretched. Finally, one man made a dash across the open ground. Jedediah's rifle cracked, the shot echoing through the canyon. The man fell. The battle was joined. For hours, the canyon was filled with the roar of gunfire. Jedediah and Sal were masters of their craft, moving between rocks, creating the illusion of a larger force, making every shot count. But Kane's men were relentless, slowly working their way up the rocks to get a flanking position. As dawn approached, they were down to their last few rounds. The end seemed inevitable. Then a new sound cut through the air, a bugle call, clear and sharp. On the ridge behind Kane's men, a line of riders appeared, silhouetted against the rising sun. Territorial Rangers. At their head was a stern, white-bearded man, Judge Alistair Blackwood. Maria had made it. The sight of the Rangers broke the morale of Kane's men. Trapped, they threw down their guns. Judge Blackwood rode down into the canyon, Maria beside him. He looked at Jedediah and Sal, 2 battered, exhausted men leaning on their rifles. He had already read the contents of the satchel. "Jedediah Stone," the judge said, his voice booming with authority. I believe you have some evidence from my court. The siege was over. The debt was paid. The aftermath in Silver Creek was a quiet affair. With the evidence from the satchel, Judge Blackwood's court made swift work of Silas Kane and his empire. Anya, brought in carefully by wagon, gave a powerful testimony that sealed their fate. The territory was free. Jedediah stood at the back of the crowded courtroom, a silent observer. This world of laws and words was not his. He felt like a wolf in a pen. Elara stood beside him, her small hand holding his tightly. During a recess, Judge Blackwood approached him, his sharp eyes seeing the wildness that still clung to Jedediah. "The territory owes you a great debt, Mr. Stone," the judge said. "I could use a man with your skills as a territorial marshal. Bring order to the wilder parts of this land." It was a fork in the trail. One path led to a badge, a place within the society he had long shunned. The other led back to his ranch, back to the silence and solitude. He looked at Elara, then at Sal, who was talking with Maria, a genuine smile on his face. He had reconnected with the world, forged alliances, found camaraderie. He was no longer the isolated man he had been. But a badge? It felt like another kind of cage. "The law has good men already, Judge," Jedediah replied. "I'm just a rancher." He stayed one more day. He used the reward money the judge insisted he take to ensure Anya and Elara had the best medical care and a stake to start a new life, somewhere green and safe. He said his goodbyes. Sal was staying, helping Maria rebuild the last drop into something more respectable. They shook hands, a bond that needed no words. He knelt before Elara and pressed the small, carved wooden bird into her hand. "You are brave," he told her. She threw her arms around his neck. "Will you visit?" she whispered. "The trail is a long one," he said, making no promise he couldn't keep. The next morning, he rode out alone. He didn't ride west, toward his empty ranch. He rode north, toward the high, unknown mountains that clawed at the sky. He was not running from his past, nor was he ready to settle into a future. He was a pathfinder. His purpose was the trail itself. The return was not to a place, but to a state of being. He had been reminded of a simple creed. A knock on the door in a storm must be answered. A promise to a child must be kept. The land ahead was the same harsh, beautiful, and unforgiving. But the hero who rode into it was not. He rode on, a solitary figure against the vast horizon.